There are those that are disciplined with a workout routine, and then there are those that use the weekend to catch up on exercise, and they're often referred to as weekend warriors. And although exercise is good, sometimes the weekend warrior can create their own set of problems. Dr. Bill Moyal is a chiropractor who has worked with Olympic and world-class athletes, and he joins us now to discuss how to avoid the weekend warrior syndrome. Dr. Moyal, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate that.
All right. Now, I can understand, certainly, if you don't do anything often and in a routine, especially like working out, you can get very sore. So besides getting sore, what else can happen to the part-time exerciser?
Well, you can actually increase the rate of injuries. Notoriously, chiropractors have been labeled as back or neck doctors, but there are many of us that have actually specialized in sports injuries and prevention of sports injuries. And like myself, and I'm not the only one, we've worked with professional athletes, Olympic athletes, world-class athletes from 88 countries, as well as having patients fly into our office from 88 countries from around the world. So it's a great subject, number one. Number two is that when someone sits behind the desk and then goes home and just relaxes and then thinks that they're going to catch up during the weekend on the exercises they didn't do, their body is just not ready for that. It'd be like taking a race car and not working on it and then going on the weekend trying to race it and win the race. It just doesn't work that way. Race car mechanics are there tuning up the machine 24/7. And even though many people don't have that kind of time, they can still do something on a daily basis, even if it's just simple stretches or things like that, that will prevent them from having injuries overcome them on the weekend. Okay?
I understand completely, and I appreciate that comparison there, because I was thinking about you don't want to just start your car and leave the garage at 100 miles an hour.
Correct.
And you were talking about simple stretches. Now, of course, that's the warm-up time, so to speak, preparing the muscles to get ready for the trauma, more or less, that they're going to go through. Is stretching, it needs to be done, but I guess there's improper ways of stretching, too. Is that one of the most overlooked things in preparing yourself for the workout?
That is a great question and a great statement at the same time. It is much overlooked. Many people don't like to do it because they're tight. But the problem is that if you don't do it, then you're going to be even tighter for the next workout. So it's important to, number one, understand that when you stretch, you want to take the muscles you're going to be using and just gently, slowly extend them and stretch them. You don't want to be ballistic, meaning you don't want to bounce the muscles, because that's a great way to tear them and create micro tears, which eventually later down the road, all of a sudden out of nowhere, you get injured and you don't understand why. And after working with so many athletes for so long, about 10, 15 years ago, I came up with what I call the snowflake theory, and it explains a lot of that instantly. Snowflake by itself weighs almost nothing, but yet one more weigh-nothing snowflake can break the branch or collapse the roof or bridge. And so what it means is it's all about accumulation. If you do things for a long time the wrong way, eventually it's going to come to the surface. It's almost like the straw that broke the camel's back. Mm-hmm. So bouncing type of stretching is a no-no. Gentle, slow stretching is a definite yes. But even more important than that is the amount of water that you take in, because if you're dehydrated and you try to stretch muscles, those muscles are going to rip. Whereas if you're hydrated, almost like a sponge, if you've got a wet sponge, you can pretty much do anything to it. But if you take a sponge that's dry and you start to twist it or bend it, it's going to break apart. And the same thing happens in the body. So very often people think that they can just, I've been sitting all week, I need to go exercise, or I've been putting on weight, I need to go exercise, and they just push their bodies without preparing, without getting into the race mode, so to say. And athletes do the same thing. You know, they have what's called game face, where all week long they're practicing, but come game time, they put on that game face. Now it's time for serious stuff. And I think it's the same thing, whether you're a weekend warrior or a professional athlete or Olympic athlete, you have to honor your body because that's what you're trying to improve and utilize to have a longer, healthier life. But you can't just abuse it all week doing nothing and then go abuse it even more by doing too much on the weekend. And it also brings up the point about not just water, but food as well. Food is your nutrition. It's your fuel. And if you have a lousy diet, you can't expect your body to perform at its best. It's just not going to happen.
Exactly. Well, and I have another question about hydration in a second, but in regard to the stretching goes, and even if you are a regular stretcher and maybe even a regular exerciser per se, as we age, our body goes through various changes as well. So if the stretching that you did at 20, and maybe you've been regular about it, though, do you have to make those adjustments as a 40 or 60-year-old that the same stretching has to evolve with your body's evolution as well?
Absolutely. That is an amazing point that you just made because most people are not aware of that. They keep thinking that they're going to keep doing what they did when they were 20 and 30. But when you're 50, 60, 70, your body is not the same. You have to honor that. We have to realize, just like in the body, the hormones drop, and I believe the percentage is like 1% per year. The amount of water and hydration and muscle tone also has a similar process that it goes through. So we're not as strong and we're not as thick as we used to be. But yet, a lot of patients that come into my office even continue to lift heavier and heavier weights, okay? And then they wonder why they're so sore and achy. And it's a lot has to do with the fact that your body's hydration mechanism, especially between the discs or between the vertebrae of the spine, which are the discs, which are shock absorbers, have a tendency to dehydrate. And so we already have some negative mechanisms taking place as we age. What we want to do is be able to recognize those and honor them by hydrating, by reducing the amount of weights. You know, unless you're a professional bodybuilder, to me, there's really no reason to go super heavy. It just doesn't make sense. You're compressing your spine and you're asking for bigger problems, and such as bulging disc, herniated disc, spinal stenosis, and all those bad things that we hear about that all too often people end up having surgery. And especially athletes, you hear that, you know, within 6 months to 2 years, their careers are pretty much over with. And that was one of my pet peeves about 15 years ago, watching all these amazing athletes that would come in, and as soon as they were diagnosed with herniated disc or bulging disc, they'd undergo surgery, and within 6 months to 2 years, their careers were over with. So getting back to the water, it's extremely important to keep hydrated. But at the same time, going back to the stretching component, if a joint or an articulation, whether it's a knee or hip or back or neck, is blocked, trying to stretch it is only going to aggravate the situation. So, for example, if you have a door and one of the hinges is stuck, trying to force that hinge is probably going to create some damage to the door. Okay? So in the body, and again, notoriously, chiropractors are known as the back and neck doctors, but in reality, we're the joint guys. And having the ability to assess and figure out whether a joint is working or not working. And the cool thing is we have a left side and right side, so we can always compare one to the other. And being able to assess that will also determine that, listen, this joint is locked. If you continue to stretch it or force it, you're going to create either micro tears or micro fractures, or you may even tear the entire muscle or tendon right off the bone. So you have to understand that just like race cars have race car mechanics, if you're going to be active, you need to find yourself somebody that's good at what they do, understands the biomechanics of sports injuries and how the body functions, and not just treat it with anti-inflammatory or muscle relaxer or painkillers, but rather by understanding that there's a function that needs to exist in order to be able to utilize your system and your body to go do whatever it is you want to do on the weekends. Just like the race car, there are going to be certain things that need to be done in order to allow that car to be able to be raced on the weekend. And that's by having someone that knows what they're doing, that understands every sound, and, hey, you know what? I turn the car on, it's just not making that normal sound. There's something going on. So almost having an ear for it, but in the sense, as chiropractors, having the hands to figure out exactly what's working, what's not working, and what's going to potentially create an injury or prevent an injury, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. And just as you had acknowledged that many people sort of overlook the importance of stretching before working out, and that's reflected with the person that's exercising. I would think that hydration is really kind of an overlooked importance for not only the workout warriors, but all of us really, and probably
absolutely
we tend to not recognize the importance, or even when we're dehydrated.
Right, absolutely. And I'm going to give you a very simple formula that works for the general population, but also for athletes. And basically, it's if you take your body weight, divide it in half. So let's say you weigh 100 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to divide it in half. That's 50. So that becomes 50 ounces. Now, if you don't work out, you're going to add another 10%. So 10% of 50 would be 5. So 55 ounces would be the minimum that you should be drinking on a daily basis.
Ah, well, that's a good formula to keep in mind.
Yep. Now, if you're an athlete, it's going to go up to 15 to 20% in addition to that. So again, 50 ounces if you weigh 100 pounds, plus another, let's say 20%, that'd be another 10, so it'd be 60 ounces minimum. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, most people don't drink anywhere near what they should be drinking. And so as they age, it creates a lot of other health issues as well, because water is what helps move the bowels and get rid of toxins and everything else. But if you're not hydrated, what's going to happen to your muscles or your skin or your intestines? They're not going to be able to flush out and stay vibrant. And so diseases can now start to build up because of all the toxins that stay within the body instead of being flushed out.
You had mentioned the padding between the disc and the back, that they can even dry out as well. Is it
Correct.
a matter of, even like with a dry sponge, once you reintroduce water, then it's functioning properly again? If you really become dehydrated, and maybe it happens over and over, once you get proper hydration, does it restore the functionality of the discs in your back?
It's going to be limited to the amount of damage that's present.
Okay.
So if you have minimal damage, then yes. But the problem is that you also have gravity at play. And so most people realize that as they age, they've actually shrunk. Okay? And we also know that between birth and the age of around 35, 40 years old, there's a process called imbibition. And what that means basically is that if you measured yourself before you went to sleep, let's say you're 6 foot tall,
Mm-hmm.
And then the next morning you would get up and measure yourself again, you might be 6 foot and a quarter, 6 foot and a half, 6 foot and 3/4 inches. And that's why sleep is so important, because that's when the body restores and rejuvenates itself. And until about the age of 35 to 40, that process takes place. After that age, it has a tendency, just like hormones, to start dropping with each year that passes by. So very often what happens is that these discs dehydrate, they bulge, they herniate, and then automatically it's thought that surgery is the only answer to that. And that is not necessarily correct. We've had many professional athletes. We have one that I call the $128 million hockey player that played for the New Jersey Devils. and ended up going back to Russia. Prior to that, he was diagnosed with multiple disc herniations, was told by 4 different doctors that he needed to have surgery, and he refused. He was sent then to me by another professional hockey player. Within 7 weeks of doing what's called non-surgical spinal decompression, he was back to pretty much 100%. It's been 5 years, no surgeries. And he just came back to the United States, and just got picked up by a team in LA. So it's pretty phenomenal. And unfortunately, as with most injuries, the first place people go to is their general practitioner, or maybe they have a friend that's an orthopedist, a neurologist. And with any injury, the first thing they want to give you is some kind of medication to knock out the pain and maybe an anti-inflammatory and then a muscle relaxant. But what are you actually doing for the injury? You know, besides masking it, you're allowing the injury to exist instead of restoring the biomechanics, restoring the muscle tension, making sure the joints are all properly aligned, and allowing the body to reset itself without drugs, without surgery, without injections. And that's really the job of the chiropractor, and the ones that specialize in sports injuries really can take on those weekend warriors or the professional athletes as well.
Whether it is the weekend warrior or the athlete that stays constant, what is your recommendation for just dealing with simple muscle soreness to help get through that recovery period?
Part of it is going to be hydration.
Okay.
And gentle stretching. And also knowing your limits. Listen, you're not, if you're 50 years old and you used to be an athlete when you were in high school, there's a little bit of time that's passed. So you can't go back and think that you're going to do it the same way you did when you were 15, 16, 17, 18, or 20. You have to consider those things, Yeah. I know that as I get older, I've learned to, instead of moving furniture and doing this, I hire people. Because my back is more important to me than, paying a little bit of something to someone to do their job and to allow me. Because if I'm out of the office, I can't help people.
Right.
And a lot of, I'm sure your listeners and a lot of people around the country, they want to exercise, they want to be healthy, but it's the old all or nothing, and it just doesn't work that way. You have to consider the fact that, are you hydrated? Do you have the proper clothing? Do you have the proper shoes? Have you prepared? Do you understand, the weather conditions and things like this? Because all of those factors play into potential injuries or not. And athletes have prepared their bodies for those conditions. And so if they can do it, and whether they get paid or not makes no difference, if you want to protect your body and stay healthy, you have to look at all those things. Just like preparing for a trip. You're not just going to get in a car and say, okay, I'm going to start driving. I don't know where. I don't know when I'll get there, but let's just get in the car and drive. No, you prepare. Prevention is the best way to avoid injuries and to get hurt.
Exactly. Dr. Bill Moyal is who we're talking with. Do you have any websites that you'd want to steer listeners to?
Sure. We have actually 2 websites. One is Miami Beach Disc Center, and disc is DISC.com. The other is Miami Beach Pain Relief Center.com. And on there you'll see a lot of videos with different athletes we've worked with and all kinds of other cases that we've handled. And it's also kind of talked a little bit about the specific 6-step protocol, which is a technique that I created over the years. After 33 years in practice, I've noticed a lot of patterns of injuries and how we can actually assess those patients prior so as to avoid any injuries that could take place. A lot of times, you get, before you start injury or you start this diet or whatever, check with your medical doctor. But most medical doctors are not trained in biomechanics. They're going to take your blood pressure, then maybe do some blood work. But functionality-wise, as far as can your joints handle the stress or your muscles ready to go, it doesn't really come into their purview. And that's more the job of the chiropractor. to be able to assess all those things, not just the spine, but the extremities, the shoulders, the elbows, the hands, the wrists, the knees, the hips, the feet. All those things need to be treated just like a race car mechanic would treat a car. You're going to check everything, not just the engine, but you're going to check the oil, the water levels, the tires, the suspension, everything. And that really makes a huge difference. And I think that's one of the reasons, because of this technique, that we've been so successful and have attracted so many athletes from all over the world.
Very important information here, Dr. Moyal. We certainly appreciate you being on the program today.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. I hope I've answered as many questions as I could and make sense to your listeners as well.
You've been very helpful. Thank you again.
Well, thank you.